Welcome, everybody, to our December Alternative Voting Methods Statewide Task Force meeting. Not everybody's here yet. People are still getting on, but I saw this approval voting bar graph, and I thought you might be interested in seeing it also. So I put it up here, and then we'll start the meeting. Do you understand how this graph is working?
Not for certain, but
Okay, so the dark color is circle here in the legend is plurality voting. And you can see the person with the highest plurality voting is Adam Schiff. If you could just vote for one, Adam Schiff has 22% voter support. Steve Garvey, Republican, has 15%. Adam Schiff is a Democrat. And in California, everybody runs against everybody else in a, quote, jungle primary. It's actually a nonpartisan blanket primary. That's the official name. And then number 3 and 4 tied are Barbara Lee and Katie Porter, and so on. That's with vote for one only. If you're allowed to vote for more than one, and then the top 2 would go on to a top 2 general election. So in this case, Adam Schiff and Steve Garvey would compete in the top 2 general election. Do you all know who Steve Garvey is? He's not a politician per se. I think he's a baseball player.
Why wouldn't it be Katie Porter?
Because Steve Garvey has 15%.
So top 2 with plurality.
Top 2 with plurality is Adam Schiff and Steve Garvey.
Okay.
But if you allow for approval voting, and this is still early in the process, right? And people aren't necessarily voting strategically in their polls and all this stuff. But if in approval voting, Adam Schiff still makes it, but then Katie Porter barely ekes out Barbara Lee. So you would get a different top 2 general election set of candidates. I just thought this was kind of interesting. So I'm going to move on. This is what our agenda is for today.
Quick comment on that one, Celeste.
Yeah.
Well, one of the differences between what they do in California and what is in Alaska versus Colorado and Colorado proposed is how many advance. So in Alaska, 4 people advance to the general election. And this is actually, for that aspect.
You decide you don't want to hear this, you can go ahead and take the background.
People are talking.
You're welcome to stay as long as you want.
Maybe Pat can mute them because I can't mute them.
This is kind of evidence.
5:30, but they're acting like it's been going since 5.
Mary?
You're on mute.
Yes.
Mary, you're not muted.
Oh, I thought I was muted.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Anyway, more than 2 is a good idea, but then you need a way to avoid spoilers. So approval voting, wouldn't it be a fine thing to do? Thanks, go ahead.
Yeah, and this doesn't necessarily change the final outcome because right now Adam Schiff is ahead. So Adam Schiff might win no matter who his opponent is, but might not. It's hard to know. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Here's our agenda for today. 3 big topics. And Barbara Winery might be here, and she's part of this Weld County lawsuit that the League of Women Voters Greeley-Weld County has filed against Weld County. We'll talk about that. Kent Theory has 3 constitutional initiatives. We'll talk about that. And then there's an alternative proposal to deal with vacancies that it'd be great to talk about if we have time. For some reason, I have to click everything twice. Okay, here's our State League voting methods position. I'm not going to read it to you every time. It's in every single slide. We can come back to it if people have questions, but basically we support better alternatives to plurality voting, and we pay attention to whether it's a single winner or a multi-winner election. And we also look at post-election analysis. Okay, when you signed on for this meeting, you should have basically approved these norms, so I'm going to move on. Anybody want to read the meeting minutes or have any comments about the meeting minutes? I think I might end up doing a lot of talking, so anytime somebody else can talk, it would save my voice, and I'm sure not people don't want to hear me talk nonstop. Okay, if we move on. Okay, let's do introductions. Neil, do you want to go around and pick on people to introduce people?
First one I see is Pat Venturo.
Hi, I'm Pat Venturo. I've been on the Boulder County voting methods team for the last, a number of years. I'm not keeping count. My husband Frank and I are both involved with the voting methods team, and we're retired and old. Other than that, I guess we're good.
Next I see on my screen is me, and I'm Neil McBurnett, and I have been involved in voting methods for several decades, and happy to be active on this team, and also very active in election integrity and auditing of elections for the last 2 decades. And now Barbara Winery. Did I pronounce that right? I don't know.
Yes. 2% of the people who look at it the first time get it right. Survey says. Yes, I'm from League of Women Voters, Greeley-Weld County. I'm also co-director of voter service on the state board. And yes, I'm involved with a lawsuit against the county commissioners on redistricting. And yes, I know about alternative voting methods, but I'm not as deep into it as many of you are. So happy to join you tonight.
Great, thank you. I have Mary next, and then Judy.
Okay, Mary Carher. I'm from Larimer County. I live in Loveland. Sorry about the muting thing earlier. I wasn't sure how big this group was going to be, if I'd even be talking to anybody. So I do voter services as a member of that team up in Larimer. I also involved with environmental groups, and I've been kind of popping in and out of the election reform kind of things when I can, because I'm very interested in that. And I did a little bit with the ranked choice voting in Fort Collins in terms of just distributing literature and trying to support that cause. And I'm excited about some of these proposals. They really look pretty encouraging, and I like to see this forward progress. So thanks for including me. I appreciate it.
Great, and Judy? And then Frank. We can't hear you, Judy.
I know.
There you go.
I'm just slow today. What can I say? I'm sorry. I'm also from Larimer County with Mary, and I'm in voter services, and I help out with the ballot issues presentation. And since last year, we only had 2, and it was so difficult. And I thought I better get on track right away to find out what's going on with things that might show up on our ballots. Just curious.
Judy and Mary, I thought that maybe Kathy Schmidt would show up. She showed up for the elections task force and asked if we were talking about Kent Theory's initiatives, and I said we would be talking at this meeting, and she's on the email list. But anyway, maybe she has something else going on.
She might still show up. I think Linda Thomas had an interest too, but I'm not sure.
Linda Thomas did register, yeah.
Okay.
I had to update, and it took me a while to get in, and maybe other people are having trouble.
Thank you. I have Frank and then Tony.
Good evening. My name's Frank Atwood. I'm with the Approval Voting Party here in Colorado, and we'll be having our state convention March 19th. And I look forward to participating here.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Celeste, for hosting.
Great, and I'll call on Tony and then the other Frank. Sorry.
Tony Larson, and I am in the Denver League. I'm doing a project for the state board, and that is going to all the task force meetings and seeing if there's overlap or things that could be coordinated among the task forces, since they seem to be independent groups at this point. So trying to rectify duplication.
And Tony is a past president of the State League and also on the national board at one point.
Great, thank you, Frank. And then Bonnie.
I'm Frank Bennett from the Denver League. I edited the legislative letter for 9 or 10 years, and I'm somewhat skeptical about the benefits of alternative voting methods, but long ago when I was a teenager, if we'd had ranked choice voting, Spiro Agnew would never have gotten to be vice president. So that is something in its favor.
What if we had had approval voting or star voting or score voting or any of these others? I think maybe we wouldn't have had Spiro Agnew either. I don't know.
Well, the point is that a racist won the Democratic primary because 2 liberal candidates split the liberal vote, and then Spiro won the governorship.
So moving away from candidates to Bonnie and then Betsy.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Petty Jones. I live in Fort Collins. I'm a fairly new league member in the last year and just got involved with the voter registration team. So this topic just seemed of interest to me. Thanks.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Betsy and then Deborah.
I'm Betsy McBride, and I'm a member of the Arapahoe Douglas County League, having lived in Colorado a long time ago. I was state president. Currently, I'm state co-president of the Idaho League, and we have a ranked choice voting initiative that is destined for the ballot in 2024. League has said we're going to do community information because we don't have a position. So Celeste is doing all this work, and sooner or later we'll just probably adopt Colorado's position by concurrence. The other piece of information is that our state league is suing the state over voter restriction laws related to student voting. We're waiting for a ruling at the state Supreme Court.
Thank you, Betsy. Deborah and then Celeste.
I'm Deborah Lycan. I live in Durango and in La Plata County. And I was just very interested in moving forward on alternative voting methods. And I sort of am the only person down here involved in this. And hopefully I'm going to start reporting to other people in the La Plata League, so they want to know more about what's going on in these meetings. And I have been involved in the study guide that we're working on producing for the Colorado League of Women Voters on alternative voting methods as an informed citizen and not an expert.
That's the primary election reform study.
Okay, thank you.
Which is about primary elections, and we haven't really talked much about primary elections as a league because they tend to be partisan by party, but with things happening like in Alaska with the nonpartisan blanket primary, it behooves us to get involved in the discussions on primary elections. Thank you so much for your help, Deborah.
On to you,
My turn?
Celeste.
Okay, I'm Celeste Landry, and I'm with the Boulder County League and one of the co-leaders of the voting methods team there. And I have also been a lobbyist with the state legislature on voting and elections and been involved since 2011. And I'm pretty passionate about all these topics. So maybe we should go ahead and start the rest of the meeting. Sound good? And if somebody else shows up, let's invite them to come on in. Okay. So you can see Tony's name there. She's the task force liaison. Okay, some news and upcoming events. As I said earlier, a lot of there's no guest speaker, so I may be doing a lot of the talking. So if anybody else wants to read this slide or go for it. We'll talk about the title board hearing. The second thing on here, Superior just passed a ballot measure to create a home rule charter commission. And so that means they are now in the process of writing a home rule charter to be adopted so they can become a home rule town. And a big part of home rule charters tends to be the voting method. So we might want to keep an eye on that. Fair Vote Canada is a big proponent of proportional representation, and every month they have a PR 101 webinar. It's a half-hour presentation with Q&A. And we aren't going to have an update on the primary election reform study. There hasn't been that much activity. Sorry, Deborah. And we have a lot of other things to talk about this month. Okay, the next meeting date would normally be January 15th, but that's Martin Luther King Day, and we have a bad record of having our meetings on holidays and religious holidays, and so I think we should have the next meeting on January 22nd unless people want to meet sooner. There are a lot of topics today that we will want to follow up on. We might want to meet earlier than January 22nd. The 8th is available on the league calendar. It might be, you might not be ready to discuss this right now, but I'm throwing this out there. So does anybody have any comments about the next meeting date? I hope everybody can make the 22nd, or if we change it to the other day. Okay, let's go ahead and move on then. Okay, the first thing we'll talk about is the Weld County lawsuit and a possible remedy that maybe our task force could propose. So, Barb, I don't know how much you feel you can chime in on these things, but if you can chime in, go ahead. Right now, there are 3 Weld County commissioners that are elected by district-only voters, not by the entire county. Weld is a home rule county, along with Pitkin, and Denver and Broomfield are also city counties, but they don't have county commissioners. Weld elects 5 county commissioners in single winner contests. 3 of those are elected by district voters and 2 are elected at large. They're all for 4-year terms. So the way it works is every even year election, voters get to vote for either 1 or 2 county commissioners. You always get to vote for an at-large one, and then every 4 years you get to vote for a district county commissioner. And feel free to jump in with questions or comments, everybody, not just Barb.
Yeah.
Okay, only 3 counties elect some of their commissioners by district. So those 3 are Weld, Arapahoe, and El Paso. Weld is the only one that's home rule. Arapahoe and El Paso elect all 5 of their commissioners by district. So each voter only gets to vote for 1 commissioner. In El Paso, an interesting thing I saw on their website is that the boundaries are established by the board every 2 years. If you look, it says the districts are equal in population, but the turnout is totally not equal. Like there's 20,000 votes difference, it seems, between some of the districts, maybe 30,000. Okay. What happened is that in 2021, Chris DeGroot Kennedy, representative, state rep, sponsored Bill 1047, which set up a redistricting process for any of the counties that elect their commissioners by district-only voters. Some of the guidelines were it had to be a public process, like the state independent redistricting commissions. The bill recommended but did not require an independent commission to draw those lines. And one of the criteria listed is preserving communities of interest. Greeley is the largest population center in Weld. It has been put into 3 different districts. I could pull up a map to show you if you'd like. The new map that was just drawn this year is not very different from the old map, but now we have this law in effect. So the argument is that Greeley should be in at most 2 districts, which should be doable, but right now it's in 3 districts. Latinos make up 30% of Weld County and 40% of Greeley. The argument that Weld County makes is that they don't have to follow HB 21-1047 because they are a home rule county. So here comes the lawsuit. League of Women Voters of Greeley, Weld County, the Latino Coalition of Weld County, Barb Winery, who's on this call, and Stacy Suniga are the plaintiffs, and the 5 county commissioners are the defendants. The complaint in the lawsuit, and this is where you, please correct me if I'm wrong, Barb, is that the county did not follow the criteria when they drew the maps, and the county did not hold a good public process.
Yeah, I'll just kind of add on the fact that, well, there's a couple, oh geez, let me get my.
Okay, I'm going to move ahead while she goes to get her notes or whatever. What the plaintiffs are asking is that the court declare that House Bill 21-1047 applies to Weld County. I don't know if they're asking for it to apply to all home rule counties, but at least to Weld County. I think Pitkin might only have 3 commissioners, so I don't think they have, they're not affected by this anyway, because they don't elect by district. And then the plaintiffs are asking Weld County to draw new commissioner district maps for the 2024 election. One of the things I asked Barb today was, I thought that they had to do the districts for the 2022 election, but that was true for state legislature, true for state senate, state reps, state senate, and congressional districts. But then there was a lag before the counties could get all the precinct maps and everything in order. So Weld County had got to wait.
Right,
Barb?
and I'll just follow up a little bit. There's a couple issues floating around in this suit, but certainly transparency and public access to the process, even without the House Bill 1047, were issues. If you were just looking at it initially, the only criteria they have for drawing boundaries is equal population in each of the 3 congressional or commissioner districts. And they did that sufficiently in terms of meeting the criteria of being within a certain percentage of having the correct population in each of the 3 county districts 1, 2, and 3. There wasn't any real, I'm trying to think what the next point really is that I want to make, that they only had 1 map And the whole process and wasn't, I mean, they can argue that they put an ad in the paper somewhere back in the lawn ads and nobody saw even knew the timeline or when it was. When we found out, our local league is when I had a meeting with our Weld County clerk to find out what the process is, because I've lived here for a long time and I still wasn't sure what it was. And she says, oh, we're having the final, we had a meeting on February 16th and on March 1st was the final hearing for the map. And there's only one map and they only moved around 2 or 3 precincts to equalize the population. If you look below the surface, yes, Greeley's divided into 3 different, each commissioner has a portion of Greeley. Each commissioner has a third of the Hispanic Latino vote. And it's equally divided up in each district between Republicans, unaffiliated, and Democrats. So I don't know. That's the problem is there wasn't a lot of time to even testify and except saying, and the whole time we thought they were.
Barb, when you
obligated.
say that they're equally divided, what you mean is they took all the Republicans in the county and put a third of them in each district, and then they put all
Yes.
the a third of each of the Democrats in the district and a third of each of the, so there's no, often a community of interest has the same political affiliation, and so they didn't consider that part at all. Just like
No,
in
no.
Colorado, Denver is one congressional district, Colorado
Mhm.
Springs is another congressional district, and certainly not equal division of the state voters by political affiliation.
So,
Okay.
and basically, you know, we thought that they were obligated to follow House Bill 21-1047 and all the criteria listed therein. And certainly communities of interest need to be taken into consideration, competitiveness, all the same ones that are considered for the congressional and legislative districts at the state level. There should have been 3 maps drawn. There should have been public hearings drawn. The only place you could find a map that was drawn was in the county clerk's office. And that was it. I did get all the materials writing to the clerk, to the county commissioners. And she sent it to me, but there was really no explanation of why they decided to draw the lines the way they did, other than to equal population. So I mean, all of the things listed in House Bill 1047 were ignored. And the argument is that we're home rule county. They don't have to follow state law or state statutes. And so therefore none of that applied. And essentially, I really can't say much more other than the lawsuit is to say it's a challenge to the Weld County Charter and saying, you know, that state law and state statute should prevail in the process.
So just like brief before I was mentioning that Superior is redoing their charter, it could be that a result of this lawsuit is that Weld County will need to redo their charter. Right now, their charter doesn't say they can't consider other criteria, does it?
No, but it says the only criteria they have to follow is to have equal population in each district.
Okay.
And there has to be 3 commissioners. There are 3 districts.
Uh-huh.
And 2 at large.
Okay.
Commissioners.
Let's keep going and talk about the possible remedy. So first of all, there are problems with Weld counties or any single winner elections. Often you have non-competitive elections. For instance, in 2022, were there 3 or only 2? That might be a mistake. I think there were 2 non-competitive elections in 2022. And then there have been some years, there have been 3 non-competitive elections. And I count a non-competitive election as one where if you have a write-in candidate, that to me doesn't count as competitive. But okay. Whereas if you have a multi-winner contest, you almost always have some competition. If if you have a non-competitive election, there's no point in voting, right? A problem with single winner elections and district lines is that you can have gerrymandering. Single winner elections are all winner take all. So in this case, if one of those parties is a majority in the state, in the county, and you put a third of each political party in each district, you're just going to have a microcosm of the larger county in each of those small counties, and the majority party will win all of the districts. And we'll get to that a little bit more. The other problem with single winner elections is that if you have two good candidates running against each other, only one can win. This happened in Boulder recently. We went to a mayoral election and we had some, you could argue, good candidates all running against each other. Only one of them could win. The others are all out. Whereas if you have a multi-winner election, multiple candidates can win. And then meanwhile, in another district, you might have one bad candidate running unopposed, and what can you do? That person's going to get elected. So here's an idea for an alternative remedy. We could use proportional representation. And that would mean you'd use a proportional voting method. All the candidates would run at large against each other in one election. Because this is a partisan election, you'd probably, if you have 3 seats to fill, you'd probably have 3 Democrats running and 3 Republicans running. They'd probably be nominated by their party, but they would all run against each other instead of having instead of having 3 single winner contests. This remedy proposes electing 3 commissioners in each cycle. The 2 highest vote getters would serve a 4-year term. The 3rd highest vote getter would serve a 2-year term. Do you all understand this proposal? Now's a good time to ask questions while this screen is up. I haven't explained the proportional voting method, but we'll get to that part next. But you understand? Everybody runs against everybody else at large, yeah?
This doesn't, so far, it doesn't look like you've got proportional voting in this. It looks like if you just did it this way, presumably, I assume that the Republican Party is the largest in Weld County. And what you get is 2 Republicans with 4-year terms and 1 Republican with a 2-year term.
Well, we'll get to that. Thanks for asking. The other advantage of proportional representation is you'd have no districts because everybody would be running at large and you wouldn't have to live in a particular district. And so you wouldn't have to worry about 1047. So what would happen if Weld County had proportional representation? I think this will answer your question, Frank. Any candidate that receives more than 25% of the vote should get a commissioner seat in a 3-winner contest. Why more than 25% of the vote? Suppose there are 100 voters, and each voter gets 1 vote in one of these ideas. So that means that if Frank Bennett, you get 26 votes, and Frank Atwood gets 26 votes, and I get 26 votes, there are not enough votes for anybody else to win a seat. So that's why it's just a little bit more than 25% of the vote. Okay. Does that make sense?
Question.
Yeah.
Betsy.
So can you generalize to say that proportional representation is just better than ranked choice voting with instant runoffs?
So instant runoff voting is a kind of ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting also has some multi-winner forms, one of which is proportional, and we'll talk about that. It has a terrible multi-winner version that's used in Utah that is not proportional at all, and I hope Colorado never, ever, ever adopts that one, and I hope Utah gets rid of it. But yeah, so this we'll get to the actual name, but we could do this with one way we could have a proportional representation is using a form of RCV called single transferable vote. Okay, so looking at this 25, more than 25% of the vote, since Weld County is about 30% Latino, as long as Latinos vote for Latino candidates, you have to vote cohesively or this doesn't work. A Latino should at least get one of the seats. Okay, this is why people vote party line, right? They vote cohesively. So the Latino Coalition is one of the plaintiffs, and even if you have single districts, single winner districts, there's no guarantee a Latino would win. The highest percentage of Latinos is 40% in Greeley, but that doesn't mean a Latino will get elected. There's still 60% that are not Latinos. And if everybody votes according to their, Latino, non-Latino separation, then Latinos would not get a seat. So we could look at this for Republicans. Right now, Weld County has 5 Republican commissioners. If a Democratic candidate can get more than 25% of the vote, then Democrats would get a seat on the Board of County Commissioners. And they do typically get more than 25% of the vote, but when it's a single winner, 2 contests, one gets 60%, one gets 40%, the Democrat has no chance. So this is true in Denver for Republicans. The Republicans don't have much chance in Denver. So, and then when you have one party running the whole show, nobody keeps them accountable. And so if you got 5 people on a board of county commissioners, it seems like you should have some diversity of political opinion.
Neil has his hand up.
Thank you, Pat.
And thanks, Celeste, for bringing this idea up. I think proposing proportional representation for this kind of situation is a great idea. That the only comment I wanted to make is that I don't think we should presume or suggest or like include language that says as long as Latinos vote for Latinos and nobody else says that. That's just too stereotypical. But having examples that say, if a group such as, if there are supporters of Latino candidates who are or whatever, or candidates supported by, I would just change the phrasing so that it doesn't assume that, let's say, all people registered Democrat would vote for a Democratic candidate, et cetera. And it's not even partisan, is it?
What is not partisan?
It is the
Weld County
County Commission in Weld.
Absolutely partisan.
It is a partisan.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, never mind. But
yeah.
So that's an easier example to talk about, but it's probably, majority unaffiliated in Weld, like most places in Colorado. So I would just try to stay away from assuming how people will vote.
I'm just giving a projection. If this happens, then that's one way Latinos could get a seat. Yeah. I mean, right now.
It's the words as long as they do, which is
okay.
A presumption kind of phrasing.
Okay. So Neil, send me some better language if you would. That would be appreciated.
Cool.
Okay. So proportional representation, to sum it up, is all about giving each sizable group a seat at the table. Single winner districts don't do that. They're winner take all, and the plurality winner prevails. So there are 2 viable options, I would say. Other people can present other ideas. Single transferable vote, which is allowed in Colorado statute. This is also known as proportional RCV. There are 2 kinds of ranked voting allowed in Colorado. They're both types of ranked choice voting, although there are some kinds of ranked voting that are not in the group of RCV. And single transferable is one, and instant runoff voting is the other one allowed in Colorado statutes. The second viable option, I would argue, is cumulative voting, which is not actually 100% proportional. It's semi-proportional. We could go into the details on that, but it's just like plurality voting, except every candidate is listed however many times, however many seats there are to fill. So in this case, if you are filling 3 seats on the Weld Board of County Commissioners, every candidate's name would be listed 3 times. And so if you're the Democrat and you want to support the Democrat, you could vote for a Democrat 3 times. That might not help though if you've got 3 Democrats running and 3 Republicans running, but it would help if, for instance, there's only 1 Latino running and you want to support a Latino, then you could vote for that Latino 3 times, use all 3 votes for that Latino. So it's not perfect. Single transferable vote is better in terms of proportionality. Both of these voting methods, notably, have been used to address violations of the Voting Rights Act. So that's, I think, a very interesting argument for going to one of these. So one question is, should the State League be an amicus curiae? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but that is an impartial advisor, often voluntary, to a court of law in a particular case. And you've probably heard of amicus briefs. I don't know if that's what we might want to submit as part of, with this proposed remedy, maybe. This would certainly have to be approved by the state board, the State League's board. But the question is, what are the next steps? And I'm glad Tony is on the call because she may be able to help us out here. One idea is we could ally with other organizations like the RCV Resource Center. This is a national organization. And the attorney, the senior counsel there, has said he would be happy to work with us on this. At least on the single transferable vote part. I don't know about the cumulative voting part, since 2 options were presented in the previous screen. And then I don't know what kind of court documents would be filed, but if there are any lawyers out there who can give some legal background, probably don't want to give advice, but speak up now.
Celeste, have you talked to Andrea Wilkins?
Yes, Andrea. Well, I have sent her a copy of the 1-pager idea. I have not heard back from her on this, no.
Okay.
I don't think. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be an important step. And
Of
then
course.
making your case to the board would be another important step. So before you sign up with any other group, which I don't think you were saying,
Right.
but those 2 things need to happen.
Betsy has her hand up as well as Neil.
Thanks. So Tony, you said talk to Andrea
Yes.
and the board. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay.
Yeah.
And somebody wanted to speak.
Betsy.
So if the suit has already been filed, have the plaintiffs already called for a remedy? And can you drop in at this point and suggest a different remedy? That sounds iffy to my ears.
So the remedy is at the bottom of this screen. They're asking to declare that House Bill 21-1047 applies to Weld County and to order Weld County to draw new district maps.
Okay, so if you want to be amicus, first of all, the court has to let you in. I mean, you have to have permission from the court. Secondly, I guess you would need to ask whether or not you could have a different remedy. I mean, the remedy seems fixed. And I'm only thinking about what our law firm, which also, of course, has a Denver office, it's Perkins Coie. Yeah.
Thanks, that's great information. I don't know how this process works, so right now we are in the gathering information process. Glad we
Neil?
can talk about it this meeting.
Well, and I'm sure Andrea will be able to answer Betsy's questions too.
Okay.
Neil has his hand up. You're muted.
Thank you. And I would just caution that there are many, first of all, note that there are many voting methods that achieve proportional representation, and note that single transferable vote, the ranked form of that, while it achieves great results, is especially with 3 candidates, we don't know how to do a risk limiting audit for that. And
But we do for cumulative voting, don't we?
But we do, and I think cumulative voting is awful. So I would propose proportional approval voting, because it is very proportional and doesn't change the ballot at all, and uses very simple, the same kinds of ballots that we use in council races in terms of yes or no on each candidate. So,
What was that?
but auditing is a big deal in my mind, and I'd hate to see us move to election methods that we don't know how to audit efficiently.
And what was that method, Kit, Neil?
Proportional approval voting, PAV.
Please
There are
write it
some
in the
places
chat.
that describe that as if it's the same as sequential proportional approval voting. And that's a mistake, and that method would also be round by round and thus run into, I think, many of the same issues that single transferable vote is. So the problem is that if you don't know what order the candidates are eliminated in, you have a great deal of difficulty even figuring out what the margin is.
So for proportional approval voting, you wouldn't be able to, you'd have to elect 3 commissioners 1 cycle, 1 year, and then 2 years later only elect 2. You wouldn't be able to elect 3 each time. Because you wouldn't have a 2-year term and 2 4-year terms. Everybody's equal.
Yeah, I think you could, that's a good point. I'd be interested in trying to solve that problem, and I think there are ways to essentially solve that in a way that's still basically what the method does is it optimizes the result, and I think there's a way to do the math so that you would optimize the result. Anyway, go ahead.
Tony
So-
has her hand up next.
Okay, I just want to say to Neil, let's get proportional approval voting used as a voting method to address a violation of the Voting Rights Act. And then we could include it on this screen as with that history. Let's see
Okay.
what we can do, Kate.
Mine's a question mostly. I'm a little confused. It seems to me that if we're talking about the lawsuit, we're only talking about the application of 1047, 70.
Yeah, 1047.
So when you start talking about different kinds of representation or voting methods, that's not applicable to the lawsuit. Am I correct?
Not at this time. That's how I understand it. I mean, this may have to go in steps.
Yeah, well,
This is the first step.
The lawsuit that you are bringing, what you want from it is that Weld is subject to home rule and has to follow the 1047 bill. That's the only thing you want to do right now. Right? So when we start talking about all the different kinds of ways of doing things, that's not applicable to the lawsuit. That's another step down the road.
I don't know, Tony, but it would be nice if you could propose a remedy for the problems that doesn't have to be exactly what the plaintiffs asked for. Maybe that's not allowed, but it would be nice.
No, and I think Betsy's right. I mean, if the lawsuit has already been filed and you already asked for a remedy, then I don't think you can amend a lawsuit with another remedy. You can comment on the remedy, but you can't. Betsy, I may be wrong, but you can say that we've got one issue right now. It's whether or not we should be amicus to the suit that has been filed, and we are sticking with just whether they're subject to 10.7. I get the numbers mixed up. 1074.
1047.
Thank you, Val.
I think I'll talk to Andrea and see what she says, and we'll all learn something from this. And I hope we get a good resolution no matter what. Shall we, any other questions?
I'll just make a comment that, I'll have to, we have had lots, about 6 months worth of the conversation with a lot of different people about this situation. And the bottom line is always we can amend the charter. I mean, we wish we could probably maybe look at 5 districts, but this is the priority right now because there's no criteria being followed other than equal populations. And I think Tony's right for now, unless we look for, that's about as much as I can say because I don't know what all the strategies are. It's very early on. It's very preliminary in the whole process. Right now, the lawyers are exchanging motions and we haven't even just know what's going to happen in the next step. I wrote them a note asking them and we had 21 days to respond. I think sometime over the holidays. So this is a great conversation. I think it's excellent to look at a real life situation and see how your multiple voting acts method or your multiple voting methods could apply to a situation like this and make it better. So thank you for doing that.
I think you're ignoring, I think there are actually 2 criteria that are being followed in designing these districts. One is that they are equal in population and the other is that the Republicans win.
Are you being cynical, Frank?
I think I'm being realistic.
Yes. Well, I didn't want to go there.
Well, I don't have a problem with it.
I hope that you don't go to 5 single winner districts because five districts because I just I think multi-winner is so much better than district elections. But...
Well, we can't even change the districts. That's another piece of the home rule charter that's not under investigation right now.
Well, if you have to change the charter because of the lawsuit, you could do something like a proportional voting method. But okay, I think we should probably move on to our next big topic. If that's okay with everybody. I think Barb also said that the Weld County lawsuit right now is it was filed. The defendants came back and said we would like it dismissed. So there's a motion to dismiss, and the plaintiffs have to respond to that motion to dismiss. And you've got till about the end of the month or so to do that. So, okay. So anybody want to jump in with anything else here? Because like I said, I'm doing a lot of talking and happy to have other people say things. Okay. Kent Theory has some constitutional initiatives. They are numbers 98, 99, and 100. They go to the title board on Wednesday at 9 a.m. And you can go there in person. You can listen remotely. You can submit public comment prior to the meeting if you'd like. The title board does two things. Mostly, they determine whether the initiatives adhere to the single subject rule, which, as you'll see when I talk about the initiatives, that's not necessarily a slam dunk. And then secondly, they determine whether the language adequately represents the changes listed in the initiative and whether the language is understandable to the voters. And you may have seen Prop HH and wondered how that got through, but that was not a title board. I think that was referred by the state legislature, so I don't know if they had to go through the title board. Okay, and the title board consists of 3 people: the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and the director of the Office of Legislative Legal Services, or matter of fact, usually they're designees. And I have testified in front of the title board. I think maybe Neil has. I know that Tony has been a designated agent in front of the title board for amendments Y and Z. So, which were funded a lot by Kent Ferry, by the way. Initiative 100 is the simplest of the 3 initiatives. It calls for a nonpartisan blanket. Some people call this open, but that's a misnomer, and we'll talk about that. Nonpartisan blanket, choose one primary, with the top 4 people going on to an instant runoff voting general election. This is what they use in Alaska. And the second part of Initiative 100 says that all the votes need to be counted before 11:59 on election day, and when not reasonably possible, as soon as is practicable. And I think this is going to drive county clerks crazy. There's more to that section, but basically, I worry about, well, we'll talk about this a little bit more. Okay, Initiative 98 does all the things that I just said, that Initiative 100 does, plus it eliminates caucuses and assemblies for placing state and federal election officials on the primary ballot, and requires those candidates to collect signatures to get on the ballot. Interestingly, Representative David Ortiz had a bill in the state legislature. It had a 1300 number on it, which meant it was one of the very last bills introduced. It did not make it through the process, but he's talked about introducing it again next year, about disability access to elections. And one thing it says is you can't get rid of caucuses and assemblies, because that's a way for people with disabilities to get on the primary ballot, because collecting signatures can be hard if you are not able-bodied to collect them. So that's a big deal. And the major parties are unanimous in their opposition to Initiative 98. Okay. The other thing that Initiative 98 does is it eliminates the partisan vacancy and office committees, otherwise known as vacancy committees, but these are only for elected officials. And in this case, only for the elected state legislators. And it would replace those committees of party insiders with a special election that everybody could vote in. In theory, this is a wonderful idea to let more people pick the representatives, but special elections cost a ton of money. Okay, Initiative 99 does everything 98 does, plus it would use instant runoff voting for the November presidential election. I found this interesting. I thought, well, everybody's interested in a better voting method for the primary election. I don't think people really care for the November election, but that's the only one that they talked about, was the November presidential election. Okay, so now that you've got the breakdown of those 3 initiatives, some of us state league people met last week with Kent Ferry's Chief of Staff, Jason Bertolacci, and Unite America's Emily Baller. We plan to meet again in January. Some of our general concerns were that these changes are to the Constitution, not to statute. The advantage of, so constitutional changes require 55% vote of the people. Statutory only require just above 50%. And so we asked them, why? Why are you going constitutional? Why not statutory? And they said, if we go constitutional, we can just put in the broad idea and not worry about the details. If you start having to do statutory, then even the ballot title gets detailed, like Prop HH got very detailed. And so they figure if you have these broad platitudes, that gets you 3% more of the vote right there. So then you only need to make up 2% more to make it constitutional. I thought that was very interesting. I think it should be easier to do. I personally wish you could, if language makes that big a difference, I wish that statutory changes could be broad platitudes also, because it's concerning that people are attracted to constitutional changes for that reason. It's hard to change the Constitution, as we know, because Amendment 76 got rid of 17-year-olds voting in presidential primaries, and I don't know how to change it back now that that's been changed in the Constitution. There are also some language inaccuracies that we mentioned, and which I'll talk about as we get on later. So we had some concerns also about the content of the initiative. I mentioned special elections and how much they cost. We're worried about that requirement to report results on election night. I think there's so much election conspiracy stuff out there right now is that requirement just feeding into the election conspiracy talk? I don't know, but I don't think Kent Thiry talked to county clerks and the Secretary of State about that part. And then I think that if you try to implement instant runoff voting statewide, you're going to get a lot of pushback from the county clerks and the Secretary of State. Probably less now because we do have a test case with Boulder having done it, administered by a county clerk, but I still think that you're going to get pushback, so that's a concern. Interestingly, RCV for Colorado, their concern is the hurdle that minor parties would face getting on the general election ballot. So right now, minor parties just go straight to the general election ballot. They don't have to go through a primary. If there's only one person from their party who wants to run for the office, they just put that person straight on the general election ballot. But under this situation, if somebody wanted to run for Secretary of State on the approval voting party, they'd have to make it through the blanket primary, and then they could get on the general election ballot. They'd have to be one of the top 4 people. So, okay, does anybody have anything else that they are concerned about? Or, I mean, in general, people like the idea of a better voting method, maybe not the county clerks and the county clerks and the people in the Secretary of State's office who help the county clerks, but that hasn't been the concern. The concern has been the caucus and eliminating caucuses and assemblies, instituting special elections, etc. Does anybody else want to add in anything here? Frank?
I have a strong suspicion that these will all be thrown out as not meeting the single subject. And I guarantee you that if they're not thrown out for not meeting the single subject, from what you've said about the Republican and Democratic parties being opposed, they will file a lawsuit to get the courts to throw them out. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on that level.
And I agree with Frank. It seems to me that there's much more going on than just one thing. in these proposals. And also, well, I'll just leave it there.
So Jason Bertolacci does not expect any of these 3 initiatives to be in final form. So we'll see what happens, but they're very oriented toward passage of an initiative. And Kent Theory has successfully gotten 5 amendments or initiatives passed. So they're pros at this. So we'll see what happens.
Well, let's see who wrote this, because the people that are writing this one are different than the people that did Y and Z, for example. So that's something to look into. Again, yes, the wording is not what's going to appear on the ballot, but deciding whether the proposal is single subject or not is the very first thing they do without doing anything to the wording. So if they think it's not single subject, they're going to say, okay, that's the end of that. Put it in the waste paper basket. So they would, the people who are writing this and proposing it can come back with another proposal at some time if they want to continue that, but they will learn from what has happened, what are the problems are with their current proposal. The other thing is, Celeste, have you looked at the Legislative Council's comments about these proposals? Because you learn a lot.
I went to the hearing. I mean, I zoomed into the hearing, actually.
Okay.
I took notes and everything. And we'll talk about that in the very next slide.
All righty.
Okay, there are various things going on in the chat.
I'm going to jump in first of all and note that as the person asking folks to introduce themselves, I'd like to welcome Harvey Branscombe and see if Harvey wants to introduce himself for the assembled throng, and then I have a comment.
Harvey Branscombe from electionquality.com, Eagle County. I'm actually in San Diego again, but I'll be back in Colorado soon for Christmas. And yeah, I'm basically a proponent for approval voting process, but I have been watching, very interested in this whole topic, and did not know that there were initiatives coming from Kent Theory, who is, as we know, quite successful at producing things, and isn't really interested in hearing about changes as far as I know from the past, but I hope he is in it now.
Thanks.
And I'll just jump in and say, or maybe you're about to cover this, but the notion of counting the vote by election night is a crazy idea.
That's just not happen.
No. But it depends on when you start counting them. If you, no, seriously, if you counted them as they came in, since most of the votes are delivered in the mail, if you counted them as they came in, I don't think it would be a problem, would it?
They do already essentially scan and interpret every ballot as it comes in, and those are all ready to just go on election day. Over half of the ballots, as I understand it, are delivered to the clerks on election day, and so they're doing their very best and cannot manage to finish by that evening. So,
And there are also ballots that come from overseas, and they're given a bit more flexibility. So depending upon how that's written in the proposal, those ballots would not necessarily meet the 12 o'clock deadline.
yeah, they have 7 days to get ballots in from overseas.
And there's a curing period also. So for instance, when Peg Pearl ran against Paul Lopez for, was it the Democratic Party, primary for Denver clerk, they had to, they weren't able to announce the results because they had to cure a bunch of the ballots, and that took some days. So, okay.
Deborah has her hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, I just have a question really. So one of the things that seems to concern me about this is that Kent Theory gets involved in this with all his money and moves instant runoff voting forward in such a hurry that the time to consider any alternative, like the approval voting that I only just personally just learned about, and I find that people I talk to have never heard of, and they have heard of ranked choice voting. It seems like there's so much name recognition around this instant runoff voting system that if we move that forward, we don't have an opportunity to propose things that might actually be better.
Deborah, I have two comments on that. One thing is you can say to somebody, have you heard about approval voting? And they go, oh yeah, I love ranked choice voting.
Oh yeah.
So like, you know, so like there's bad stuff going on language wise. Okay. And then the second thing is I asked Jason about, you know, would you be open to any other voting methods? And he said, well, we've got $8 to $10 million coming in nationally, and those people you know, require that we use instant RCV, as he said. So you know, no, I don't think that's one of the points that they're willing to flex on. So let's talk about, at the meeting, I brought up 3 things that were problematic in terms of the language. The most glaring one is the word majority. When during the Ledge Council staff hearing, they were asked on each of these 3 initiatives, what is the single subject? And the answer was a voting system to do and elect officials by majority support. And that's the word that they used, majority support. And we in the league have talked a lot about how guaranteeing a majority is impossible when a candidate has a contest has more than 2 candidates. In instant runoff voting, one of the specific causes is exhausted ballots, but for all contests, how are we going to do this? Are we measuring a majority of all ballots, of all votes, or only of continuing votes? So for instance, in Boulder's newly elected mayor got 2 out of 3 of these majorities. He got a majority of continuing votes. He got a majority of all the votes, but he didn't get a majority of all the ballots. So fascinating stuff, but majority is a problematic term. And it's so problematic that our state league successfully argued to take out the majority criterion in the 2020 position that talked about voting methods. Before it got adopted, of course. That was a big national lobbying effort. Thank you, Tony, for all your help on that. So a recommendation that we could make in terms of this problematic language is to remove majority from the initiative text or clarify a majority of active ballots every time they mention majority. I don't think they want to do that, but majority is such a problematic term. I think we should argue that they should. So that's okay. So then I have a couple slides here showing about majorities.
So back to the majority slide. Once again, even saying majority of active ballots vastly allows vast confusion, as we saw in the first time that Alaska used the exact form of voting that we're talking about here. The candidates who made it to the final round of the instant runoff voting tally both lost by a majority to the candidate who was eliminated just prior to that round. So dignifying that result.
Hold on, Neil. You have to clarify that by saying if you do a head-to-head comparison
sure.
of all the ballots. I mean, people here might not understand all the intricacies.
No, that's very true. That's very true. But it's very clear that the ballots that people cast in Alaska in that first contest showed a majority of voters preferred Begich to each of the 2 candidates who was in the final tally. So anytime I hear the word majority, not only is it important that we deal with the exhausted ballot measure, but it's important to say that majority of what? It's certainly not majority of support for any particular candidate in any way compared to each of the others. Thanks.
So your point is well taken. And when you talk about active ballots, we'd have to say, I mean, a majority of active ballots with head-to-head comparisons meant Nick Begich would have won in Alaska. That's what. And so majority of active ballots, I mean, maybe we just say remove majority and not
Wow.
even have
You
that
know.
second part in there.
This is strike two in my mind against the idea of using instant runoff for this purpose, but yeah, all of the above.
Okay, well, okay. They're accepting comments for tomorrow, Wednesday's title board hearing, and maybe we'll talk about whether the league should submit a comment, and we would have to do it very soon. And Neil, I know you might do one on your own or something. I don't know, but anyway, let's move on.
I did post the text in the chat if people want to go to that link.
Okay, so I'm not going to go through these two slides, but this slide talks about Aaron Brockett getting 51.9% of continuing ballots. That's in green. And then here, Aaron Brockett got 51.414% of total votes, which is different from continuing votes, and or continuing ballots, whatever you want to call it, and did not even get a majority of the total ballots because there were more than 1,000 blank ballots. Okay, let's moving on to the.
Celeste, Tony has her hand up.
Okay.
Tony.
Sorry, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Celeste is bringing up next.
Oh.
Okay. So, do you want to talk now, or you want to go through the slide first?
Well, let me say this. So if we were to speak at the title board hearing, which incidentally I'm going to follow, I will be listening in. If they will very quickly decide whether it's single subject or not. So if it is not single subject, then the people have to go back to the drawing board if they want to continue. If it is single subject, then they will go ahead and get to the wording. But for us to, first of all, it's pretty unusual for outsiders, if you will, to comment on the single subject piece of it. That's pretty much the bailiwick of the commission. It's not prohibited, but people just generally don't do that. And
my guess is the Democratic and Republican parties might in this case.
Well, yeah, who knows? Who knows? But on the other hand, I'm thinking politically, it might be better for us to stay out of that part.
Andrea agrees. Andrea Wilkin agrees. Stay out of this whole single subject part.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then the other part of it, the wording, they're going to do a lot. I mean, they can take an hour to look at these proposals and sit there, and they will talk about whether there should be a comma, whether that should be in capital letters, how the sentence should be written. It can go on forever and ever and ever. So it's grass growing watching it. So once they get to what they think is final, if they get there, then that I think is a better time for us to comment on the wording, and we can challenge the wording, and they will have to have a rehearing. So I think sort of waiting a bit to see what is happening so that we don't get into a tangle, that challenging the wording would be better and when we ask for a rehearing if we think they really screwed up.
Okay, so that's confusing to me because I didn't know what was when you were allowed to make those comments.
Well, you sort of introduced it, so.
So
And-
I'll go back and continue sharing my screen because and I'll come back to this in just a second. Where is, here we go. Okay. I thought, I mean, I only saw in the online documentation that you have to make your comments prior to the hearing, but you're saying you can do comments after the hearing and that can trigger a rehearing?
Yes, but
And,
what
and
you do is you wouldn't make the comments at the initial hearing. You would write in comments and then and challenge and have them do a rehearing. It would be at a different day.
could we not submit comments beforehand? In writing, not speak at the meeting, but just put it in writing so they have them in front of them and they could ask about that if they want to go there. If they want to just say, single subject, you're out of here, go back, and then they don't have to worry about the language. But Andrea suggested that action, like,
Yeah, that is a possible action. I'm not opposed to that, and that you know, don't go into super detail, but say,
right.
we find there are problems with this, this, and this, you
Right.
know, and you know, you should address these when you're trying to rewrite or alter the
Right.
proposal. That's
Okay, so
a possibility. Either one is fine with.
okay. So we're really getting into the like how to deal with legislation, lobbying kind of stuff here, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there. Okay, so they use the term RCV. I'm gonna go share my screen. Here's the initiative. So if you look for here's the only case where they use the word ranked choice voting. It says the Secretary of State shall promulgate rules, blah, blah, blah. The rules shall prescribe the methods and procedures for tabulating, auditing, and reporting results in an election using ranked choice voting. Other than this, all of the times they talk about the voting method, they use the word instant runoff voting. So they've got that 11 times. That's what is in statute. That's what they should say. They should not use the term RCV at all, because RCV includes some ranked voting methods, not all. There are two kinds that are in statute. And as I mentioned before, any alternative voting method will get labeled RCV, even something that's not a ranking method. The Secretary of State, as I said, considers RCV a brand name and doesn't use it. And a problem with using the term is that RCV has been credited and blamed with accomplishing everything that any individual ranked voting method can do. So it's very confusing. The media don't understand it. It would be so much better to just say instant runoff voting, and then we can all be on the same page. So the recommendation that we would make, I would presume, is replace RCV with instant runoff voting. Okay, the third problematic language in the initiatives is this term called open primary, and they recognize this, and they have a suggestion for a different phrase. But traditionally, open primary has meant separate primaries. One Republican primary, one Democratic primary, but the voters are not constrained. They can vote in either one of those primaries. And Colorado has this situation for unaffiliated voters. They can vote in either the Democratic or the Republican primary. But if you're a Republican, you cannot vote in the Democratic primary. So these initiatives are calling for one primary, not separate primaries for parties. it's called a nonpartisan blanket primary. We start getting into the details here, because when it's just called a blanket primary, that means the top Democrat goes on, the top Republican goes on, the top Libertarian goes on, and so on. But if it's a nonpartisan blanket primary, you all run against each other, but only the top vote getters, regardless of party, advance to the general.
And everyone can vote, right?
And everyone votes in that one election, no matter whether you're affiliated with a party or not. Yeah. So in order to, but one of the problems is open primary. There's even a group called Open Primaries, and they're advocating for nonpartisan blanket primaries. But what sounds better, open primary or nonpartisan blanket primary? I mean, for the initiative language, they should change it to nonpartisan blanket primary, or Jason Bertolacci suggests using the word all candidate primary, which would be fine. Everybody can vote in the all candidate primary. So they realize this problem. So here is a quote from the title board's webpage. When finalizing the language for an initiative, the title board considers whether the language in the question adequately represents the changes to law and whether the language in the question would be understandable to voters. This is the second thing that they do at a title board hearing. The first thing is decide the single subject question. And then they also worry about the commas, as Tony said. So a question is, should we submit public comment regarding the language in the initiative? As Tony said, we don't think we need, and Andrea, we don't think we need to get into the single subject question, but we could submit something individually regarding this language, but I think it would carry more heft if the state league submitted it. And I thought we had to submit it before Wednesday's hearing, but maybe that's not the case. But maybe we should try to submit it before Wednesday's hearing anyway, just so that the 3 title board members have it in front of them. So I don't know if people have comments about this.
Yeah, I think you have 2 times. You could do it before Wednesday, and then if things are still going on, you could do it and ask for a rehearing.
Okay. The other thing Andrea suggested is that we give Jason and Emily, who are working on this initiative, a heads up about these language problems. And I'm happy to do that. They're both very reasonable people to work with, I think. They're laser focused on getting something passed, but they're reasonable people to work with. So does anybody here have strong opinions either way about submitting a public comment? Or is anybody here opposed to submitting a public comment, say, prior to the hearing? Would you definitively prefer that we do it after the hearing?
I just wanted to touch on another issue that I don't know what you're going to present with.
Let's answer this question first, unless, are you talking about?
I think it depends on what we might say.
The public comment would be only on the problematic language, but we could
Right, but
add.
there's more problematic language is my point.
Okay. Okay, do we want to ask about the 3 problematic terms that we've already mentioned first, or do we want to add in Neil's and then ask? Go ahead, Neil.
So another thing that this calls for is reporting the results, and I posted some of the language in the chat by election night. And this is a very complicated thing. The way that it proposes doing it, first of all, is that votes be counted as they are received. So weeks before the election, some votes might be received and they'd be required to be counted. And that risks, I mean, they say you shouldn't release the results, but as soon as results exist in a way that they're counted, then people who control the computers can figure out what they are. And now you've lost some of the, you can report on result. Insiders can know what's going on before everybody has voted, and that's a bad thing. So the language should absolutely be changed to not talk about counting, but talk potentially about scanning and interpreting, which can be done with less risk. Anyway, and the other thing that it says is to report the counting results as soon as possible. And they do note that there is that it's important to count all the overseas ballots, which might come in 7 days, up to 7 days later. It's important to allow people to cure their ballot and have those counted. But it's also important that when those are possibilities, it's important that some other results be withheld and reported along with, suppose that one ballot in the whole county was known to be bad signature and needed to be cured. If you wait until the last, until that's cured and then you report one more vote, well, everybody knows in principle, whose vote that was, and you've destroyed the anonymity of that ballot. So you need to withhold other things. It's complicated to do this. The initiative doesn't allow that to be done. So that's really a straightforward integrity of the ballot and anonymities of the ballot problem.
So to me, that sounds like initiative content more than a language inaccuracy. I mean, it's you're saying it's not allowed. That's a process.
Well, it
that's not
conflicts
so
with
much. The word RCV is vague and doesn't mean, what does it mean here? The word open primary is used incorrectly. Majority is incorrect. I mean, so I like the question
there's two
is
things. Well, one, we want to give commentary to the proponents, and two, we want to talk to the title board. What you're saying is the title board is not interested in whether it's a good or not idea or not, and I hear that. I think this should be, brought up for the proponents.
when we talked in January or before, like I said, I emailed Jason over the weekend about a problem in the text, and he emailed me back today. We went back and forth. I mean, I can certainly email him your comments, and I'd be happy to. Maybe you could send them to me separately so I can copy the chat or something. But I think that's separate from the title board working on the language. So the question that I asked before is this something that the league, and we're already at 7 o'clock, I realize that. I said, is anybody opposed to submitting public comment prior to the hearing? It may be that the LAC will have to do an email vote on this tomorrow, or maybe there'll have to be an executive decision made by the state leaders if we do it prior to the hearing. So if anybody's opposed, speak now. If anybody has concerns, now is a good time. I mean, I basically want to hear from people what people think. I mean, these things, not open primary, but RCV and majority, our league has been talking about for a long time. So those two should be uncontroversial.
I agree.
We even argued at the national level about this in 2020, and 2019. So
I think we should comment on both of those things.
All
before
three?
we-
all three words. Neil, all three
Yeah,
terms?
I don't see the three listed here, but
Open primary, RCV, and majority.
yes.
Okay. I heard Neil. I didn't hear anybody else.
I agree.
Okay, maybe I'll I've already mentioned it to Andrea, and we've talked about how this process could work. So, and it sounded like Tony said you could do it before or after. So, okay. I propose we don't talk about this proposal since we're at 7 o'clock. And we had talked about meeting in January 22nd, which seems like a long time away, but we could meet instead January 8th, if people feel like we need to meet sooner.
Well,
Um,
I think you should at least tee up the notion that some of those initiatives suggest having elections rather than vacancies, that it's a big, complicated deal, that having a lot more elections that might happen at any time is hugely disruptive to a state process that involves the need for audits and a tight calendar in lots of cases. So, that's just framing the topic without getting into details.
Neil, one of the people who met with Kent Theory's group was Karen Sheik, because she is the leader of the elections task force. Maybe you're a member of the Secretary of State's bipartisan election advisory board. Maybe you should be at the next meeting.
Be happy to.
I can ask Andrea about that because she's organizing the meetings. So thanks, those of you who are sticking around for this. Is there anything else people want to talk about? I feel like we did a lot.
You did a lot. You're amazing, Celeste.
Thank
I
you for
think
all
it's
that good
also- yeah.
information. Thank you.
I think it's also important to give the proponents a heads up.
Yeah. Just a 2-sentence summary of what the vacancy committee thing was about. This alternative proposal, I came up with it, and it would reduce the number of vacancies. It would have more special elections, but they would be held at the same time as regular elections. So they would be special only in the sense that they're not at the normal November of even years. They might be November of odd year, or it might be when the Denver mayoral election is being held, they would have another election to fill Representative Serena Gonzalez Gutierrez's seat, because she is getting elected to the Denver City Council. And it would use a better voting method for that special election, because I would suggest approval voting, because that's off the shelf and easy to use and easy to audit, and it's the county clerks would be more likely to say okay to it, I think. So, but
I would just note one odd complication of an off-year election is that all of a sudden it makes the ballot district overlaps more complicated, which causes yet more chance that there are ballots that would have anonymity issues because of the horrible way that we do districting and small districts and stuff. So it's better than having to do an election at the drop of a hat, but don't think it's easy.
it would be, yeah, okay.
I actually recommended and officiated over a vacancy committee that ran with approval voting in Eagle County. And there was a problem with it. It turned out we ended up with a sequential set of ties. And that was kind of awkward, actually. And they were pointing at me as saying, this is your fault for choosing this method without having a tie-breaking method. So you need to make sure you have a tie-breaking method. Because the vacancy committees tend to be a small number of voters and a large number of candidates. And that's a reason to use approval voting for sure. But it also can mean that you need a solution for that.
Harvey, do you have the cast vote records for that election so we could analyze it?
In Eagle County, that vacancy committee would be held on scraps of paper, and I doubt it. But anyway, it was a small, like I said, a small number means like we had 5 candidates and 15, something like that. So very small.
So there were 64 voters, 65 voters, something like that in a House District 10 vacancy committee, and that used approval voting to get rid of half of the candidates. There were 6 candidates. And then after that, it was choose one and exhaustive voting. So you choose one, there are 3 candidates, you choose one, the lowest vote getter is eliminated, you choose one, and then you have a winner. So,
See.
and we have the cast vote records for that, so we can sort of the cast, we have the data without names. There was a tie also, but it was a tie in the bottom three that got eliminated. So anyway, okay.
Okay.
Okay. I got your message, Betsy. I look forward to your email. Okay. So long, everybody. Let's stop the recording, and that'll save also the chat, right?
Do I need to do that, or are you also a host?
I'm not a host.
Okay, let's see if this works.